Hey, what's going on everybody? Commander Crane here, and we are back with another Pioneer deck tech, and today we're going to be talking about Bant Walls Aggro. Definitely one of the more funny, unique decks that I've ever done on the channel here. As always, at the end of the video, let me know if there's any cards that I forgot. I know there's a lot of cuts I had to make. I wanted to include a ton of different cards in here. Just let me know if there's any card that I forgot that definitely should have been in the list. And as always, if there's any suggestions that you have for upcoming videos, just let me know in the comment section below. So, alright, Bant Walls Aggro. So, everybody knows about like the Assault Formation, High Alert kind of decks, you know, and that's essentially what we're going to be playing today. And I think that this deck, especially, like Patrick Chapin once said, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit what he said, is sometimes you got to play slightly worse cards to make a combination of cards that like make a good deck. And that's kind of how this is. Because I mean, these cards virtually in this deck see play nowhere else except in a strategy like this. They didn't really see standard play, they don't see pioneer play, they don't see modern play. A lot of them are very, very unique and very, very cool. So if you're looking for a different kind of aggro deck to spice things up, I think this deck is definitely going to be the deck for you. So alright, let's go and hop into it here. So our 1-drops. We're playing 4 Aegis Turtle, 4 Jetty Offshoot, and 2 Resolute Watchdog. So Aegis Turtle obviously is just, it's a 0/5 for a blue. That's it. That's what it does. But technically, with the right cards, this is actually a 5/5 for 1, which is very cool. Jetty Offshoot, just a pretty solid creature in general, you know. It's technically a 3/3 for us, and then when a land enters, we gain a life. So it's just good against aggro, you know. That incidental life gain can end up being the difference between, you know, dying on the crackback and not, which is fantastic. And then Resolute Watchdog is really just a good protection creature. It's a good early game. It also is nice, too, because if our opponent has like a bunch of 2/1s and we have our 0/3s and 0/5s, they can kind of attack as long as they have more creatures. But at least with Resolute Watchdog, it kind of keeps them at bay a little bit. But the main reason we are playing it is so we can protect our better creatures later on down the road. So, but still a very, very good card in its own right. So, those are our very spicy 1-drops. These are our 2-drops. We're playing 2 Crashing Drawbridge. The card that probably has seen the most play out of anything in this deck, but still not even that much. You know, tap, give your creatures haste. Just a solid effect. Then 4 Fortified Rampart, a 0/6 for 1 and a white Defender. That's all it is. That's it. It just keeps those Eldrazi Scions at bay, obviously, as you can see, according to the art there. And then we're also playing 2 Wall of Mulch. Definitely not one of the bigger walls in the deck, but it's still very good because we can tap a green, sacrifice a wall, and draw a card. So if our opponent's going to be destroying any of our walls or anything like that, at least we can sacrifice them to draw a card. Or, you know, in a desperate situation, you know, we can like attack and then deal damage, sacrifice it to try and draw something. I don't know. It's just a good card in general. Main reason I put it in here is just, you know, if our opponents are going to fatal push all of our walls and stuff, we can at least get some value from it as long as we have some untapped mana. So, fantastic card. So, let's go and hop into some of our other cards. I would say this is kind of the core of the deck right here, besides the actual high alerts themselves. So, we're playing 2 Tetsuko Umezawa Fugitives. This card is awesome because creatures you control with power or toughness 1 or less can't be blocked. Well, all of our walls, I think our wall that has the most power is 1. So in that case, all of our creatures are essentially unblockable, which is just awesome. So, you know, it can definitely lead to some pretty easy kills. You know, we get out a couple walls, play a high alert, and then play Tetsuko, and boom, they can't block any of our creatures, which is pretty awesome. So, definitely, it's also the one, like, non-wall in the deck, pretty much, besides Arcades itself, which is also pretty funny. We're also playing 4 Hover Barrier. It's an 0/6 for 2 and a blue with Defender in Flying, which flying is the important part. It has, you know, it has a lot of toughness, so it's essentially a 6/6, but the fact that it's flying is fantastic. It just flies over our opponents. If our opponents are playing flyers as well, it's an 0/6. I mean, they're not going to be able to bust through that thing, which is fantastic. So, definitely Hover Barrier, one of the bigger, beefier cards. Fortified Rampart is just like the bigger version on the ground. And then Hover Barrier, obviously, for 1 more mana, we get a nice flyer. Then we're also playing 3 Arcades the Strategist. Obviously, for people who saw the thumbnail, definitely knew that. Flying Vigilance 3/5 for 1 green, white, blue. Whenever a creature with Defender enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card, which is pretty good. Most of our creatures have Defender. Not all of them do, but a very big, very large amount of them do. So typically we're going to be drawing some cards off this. But even if we don't, that's still okay because each creature you control with Defender assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. and can attack as though it didn't have defenders. So obviously that's kind of the additional copies of, making our defenders be able to attack. And essentially it's also a 5/5 because it's creatures with defender sign damage equal to toughness. So it's essentially a 5/5 flying vigilant flyer for 4, which is just an incredibly good rate. And it draws us cards. So why wouldn't we play it? So definitely big part of the deck for sure, as well as these cards on the next slide. We're playing 4 Assault Formation and 4 High Alert. They each have the text, each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power, but they're a little bit different though. So Assault Formation is obviously 2 mana, and then a green target creature with Defender can attack this turn as though it didn't have Defender, and then 2 and a green creatures you control get +0/+1 until end of turn. So a little bit different than High Alert, because High Alert just says creatures you control can attack as though they didn't have Defender. You don't have to pay any mana for it, but, they both have their pros and cons, because obviously High Alert is a little bit more expensive, but you don't have to pay any mana for them to be able to attack. But Assault Formation is a great late game tool, just because it can give our creatures +0/+1. Technically, Assault Formation in the right hand is a little bit faster, because we can go Aegis Turtle and then play Assault Formation and immediately attack for 5, which is pretty insane with 1 creature. But I would say they both have their pros and cons, but we want to make sure we have this effect, because if we just have a whole bunch of walls in play and we don't have one of these effects, then we just can't do anything. So it's very important that we have one of those. So we're playing 4 Assault Formation, 4 High Alert, and then 3 Arcades. So generally, it's pretty easy for us to be able to get one of those effects in play. And then our last spicy card that we're playing is 2 Tower Defense. 1 and a green instant. Creatures you control get +0/+5 and gain reach until end of turn. So if we have a whole bunch of walls in play, our opponent's probably just dead, because giving +0/+5 is essentially giving +5/+5. The reach doesn't even really matter. It's just the fact that 2 mana giving all of our creatures +5/+5 is just, that's an incredibly good rate. We just have a couple walls in play, and generally our opponent, they are donezo. So Tower Defense, very, very spicy, fun card to be playing in the list. And that is our entire main board as well, except for the lands, which we're going to hop into that right now. So we're playing 4 Botanical Sanctum, 4 Seachrome Coast, 4 Razor Verge Thicket, 3 Breeding Pool, 2 Hallowed Fountain, 2 Temple Garden, and then finishing out our lands, we're playing 2 Boseiju Who Endures, 1 Island, and 1 Plains as well. I couldn't really fit any man lands in this deck, and I really didn't almost think we need them for the most part. Obviously, there's some situations where we could, take advantage of like a lair, but ultimately, with us being 3 color, I decided to just not play into the man lands. And as our spicy lands of the day, I picked a couple of the nice artworks from the original Return to Ravnica, just because we have a lot of Ravnica cards in here, from the original Return block as well as the Guild set. I just kind of wanted to do some nice Ravnica lands, and I love the Ravnica arts. I think they're some of the best basics you can play in the game. I know a lot of people do full arts nowadays, which nothing obviously wrong with full arts. I love playing them, but it's nice to see some really beautiful artwork on like the traditional basic lands. So, and these are definitely some of the better ones you can play, in my opinion. So that's our entire main board. We're going to hop into sideboarding here, as well as go over some budget options. So sideboarding, we're obviously going to need some graveyard hate, like Rest in Peace. That's definitely the best option for us to play. The card's about $1, and it's just the best one to be playing. So if you don't have Rest in Peace, I highly suggest picking those up. And then extra removal, cards like Portable Hole are fantastic. I really like the new Get Lost from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. It's extremely flexible and instant speed. That's personally what I would recommend. We also are going to want some hate pieces like Damping Sphere and Deafening Silence. Really good against Arclight Phoenix, Lotus Combo, Mono Green Devotion, which those are some of the biggest decks in the format. So I always recommend playing some cards that are going to beat up on those decks, as well as Gigantha. So as the main board currently stands right now, we are able to play Gigantha in the sideboard, and as well as my current sideboard configuration. So if you'd like to know the exact specifications of what I'm playing, the deck list is in the description below. But just remember, if you change the sideboard, maybe you can't play the Gigantha, which is honestly okay. Don't feel like you have to play it. If you wanted to play like Wall of Frost in your deck instead of like Hover Barrier or something, you can't play the Gigantha. That's perfectly fine. It was mostly just, oh hey, I just noticed I could play Gigantha, so why not? We were able to play it, so it's just a free card. So figured I would throw that in there as well. And we still have to talk about some budget options here. So budget options are a little bit different than normal. So this deck is a little bit on the pricier end in terms of decks that I typically build on the channel, but that's because we're a 3-color deck, which obviously means we have some very expensive dual lands. So to make that a little bit cheaper, the best ways to do it are to cut the shock in the utility lands. So obviously like the Temple Garden, the Breeding Pool, the Hallowed Fountain, the Boseijus, and then kind of replace those with other dual lands. So we already have the fast lands, which most of those are already pretty cheap, except for Botanical Sanctum. Those are a couple dollars a piece, but replace them with pain lands or the slow lands. The slow lands being the lands from Innistrad, Crimson Vow, and Midnight Hunt. Most of those lands are generally pretty cheap, but they also come in untapped after turn, I think they come on untapped on turn 3, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure. I don't really play those lands too much, but the pain lands are extremely cheap, and they do come into play untapped. And what's sweet too is if you end up taking damage, the Jaddy offshoot just kind of helps, pay for that anyways, which is pretty fantastic. Also wanted to mention this, the non-lands in this deck are extremely cheap. I believe the most expensive card in the deck is Arcades, and they go for about $3 to $4 a piece. Past that, everything else is like, it's a bunch of like commons and uncommons from old sets, so they're not very much. So if you can just get some of the lands, the non-lands are extremely cheap. But for those who don't want to do the 3-color mana base and you want to stay, budget, like maybe even under $50, actually very easily under $50, I would highly recommend switching to 2-color. So there's a couple different, you could either go blue-white defenders with it, or you could go green-white defenders. So obviously with green, you get Assault Formation, and then blue-white, you get High Alert. What's great is they have a Huatli Planeswalker, from War of the Spark that says creatures deal damage equal to their toughness. You can't really play as many defenders in the deck, so you'd have to play cards like Yoke Docks, for instance, but you're still able to play a 2-color version of the deck that still has, 8 different ways to kind of help be able to, turn the deck on, essentially. So I figured I would throw that in there as well. So that's the entire deck. I'd like to thank everybody for watching this video. This was a very, very fun deck to build. I'm considering building this myself. I have most of the dual lands I need for this deck, so maybe I'll end up featuring that on the channel in one of my paper videos. Just let me know in the comment section below. What do you think about the list? Is there a card that I forgot? How many Wall of Frost should I have been playing? You just let me know in the comment section below. So I'm Commander Crane. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.